Good morning. This is Corky Alexander here, coming to you from Hamilton, Alabama. Um, I wanted to talk about watering home ministry. Um, this is one of those topics that you're not going to learn in seminary or Bible college, but it's probably a pretty universal practice among uh, ministers, probably in other faiths as well as Christianity. Um, the purpose of the videos is to get my stories down. Um, people always, they'll say nice things to you, like you ought to write a book. Well, I did write a book. My book is Native American Pentecost. It's on Amazon, and it reflects 15 years of time I spent with Indian tribes in the United States, which I haven't talked much about on this YouTube channel simply because uh, if you've ever spent a great deal of time with Native Americans, you know that a lot of the knowledge that they might be kind enough to share with you is special and not to be shared with general public. Um, Watering home ministry finds its scriptural basis in John chapter 4 when Jesus went through Samaria and met the woman at the well. The well was the center of activity and a conversation informally with this woman, and it became a iconic story in the Gospels about the woman at the well out of John chapter 4. I have about 40 years or a little better experience in formal Christian ministry, particularly Pentecostal church, and 26 years experience as a formal pastor of a congregation. And so I feel like I've been down the road enough to where I can reflect on some of the things I learned. The idea of water home ministry I first witnessed through my wife's grandfather, Reverend E.L. Newton in North Carolina. And his practice was primarily at breakfast to either go to McDonald's or Hardee's, wherever he was pastoring, and be there about 7 a.m., 7:30, something like that. He would greet the third shift people coming off work, stopping by, and then he would get the first shift people eating breakfast before they left. And normally, this would be one of the ways that he would make contact and connect with the community in which he was ministering in. And so I preached a revival for him on occasion, and he invited me to go with him in the mornings, even though I'm not a morning person. I'm a guitar player, so but had to get up early. I'm early rising this morning because I slept a lot yesterday, but you don't want to hear about my life. So, but anyway, I got up and went with him, and it was McDonald's. I think it was in Ramseur, North Carolina, or Siler City. I'm not sure if I remember exactly which town it was in. But we were there a few mornings during the week that I was preaching at his church, and I witnessed him sitting with game warden. Other people came by and sat at our booth. And one morning, he even had a man who had been diagnosed with cancer ask him to pray for him there at the table. The next morning, he told me I could sleep in, and that he was going to look at a bass boat somewhere. And so I stayed in, but the phone rang at the parsonage, and I answered it. And it was the manager of the McDonald's, and she was asking me, "Where's the preacher?" And I said, "He's gone to look at a boat this morning." She said, "Well, I'm glad nothing's happened to him or he's not sick." She said, "I just feel better having him here." Well, that made an impression on me, and so um, in later years, particularly um, particularly in '95 when I moved to Athens, Tennessee, to serve with Reverend Wayne Fritz. Um, he had a form of this ministry going, and I really got to witness the real subtlety and the real effectiveness of eating at the same restaurant every day. Um, I estimate in the in the 6 years approximately that I served under Reverend Fritz as an assistant pastor, 6 years, um, and I probably ate at the Western Sizzlin 325 times or 375 times during that period. Um, if we were doing an addition to the church or some construction, the construction crews would show up at the Western Sizzlin and sit with us, but even lay the prints out on the table while we were eating. And then individuals from the congregation would show up 11:30. I've always been an 11:30 lunch guy. I worked with my dad in the 70s. My dad was an 11:30 lunch guy, and Reverend Fritz was too. It's kind of a enigmatic there because he's going early to beat the crowd, but then he's actually staying to make sure he meets up with the crowd. And in these towns, these are not large cities, so probably what I'm talking about is somewhat of a rural method. Um, but I understand that J.C. Penney had this practice in New York City, I believe it was. I stand corrected, and there'll be somebody who'll comment to correct me on that. Because, social media, that's the main purpose of it is when you tell something you believe to be true, somebody's got to tell you it's not. Um, but here I am, I'm biting the bullet, and I'm on YouTube. How about that? Okay, so anyway, so Reverend's had this practice, and there were several things that he achieved through this. He was not a minister to schedule many meetings. He was like, and I concurred with that because I hate meetings too. I think a meeting is not worth very much. Hanging out now is another thing. But of course, those of you that are real ambitious, go-getter type, briefcase carrying preachers and social workers and stuff, you're going to be, you'd rather be poring over a laptop than a Starbucks. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about actually joining hearts with people, seeing people there. I'm not saying you can't do it in Starbucks. It's just the tables are so small that they don't allow for 4 or 5 people to eat together, and that's one of the powers of this approach. So if you're not a person who likes to do meetings and you are the senior administrator of whatever you're doing, you might opt to just show up at the same restaurant every day. Now, this is particularly effective with congregational ministry because if a couple in the church or an individual in the church need counseling, they often, especially in the South, smaller churches, they do not want their car to be seen on a weekday at the church for the other members and the biddies and the church ladies to ask, "Well, I saw your car at the church Tuesday. What were you doing?" And they don't want a counseling appointment to be public. They want it to be private. So so they could show up at the steakhouse and possibly get just a one-on-one conversation with the pastor, uh, and nobody would know the difference. They would just think they were eating lunch and not getting counseling per se. Um, a lot of what I tell on here is going to be irrelevant to the younger generation that is doing ministry at this time. Uh, the time at which I'm doing this video is 2021. We're in a pandemic, so going to a public restaurant with a crowd is going to be, difficult. But I'm telling this anyway. It's for the future and for anybody who wants to know about it. So, in the one sense, if somebody wants to talk to the preacher privately, it's an opportunity for them to do that without their car being seen at church and cause, any kind of breach of confidentiality. Also, Reverend Fritz, because of the large church, somewhere between 600 and 800 members at different times, we were serving during a very fruitful time of that congregation in Athens, Tennessee. During that time, his church it became kind of a clearinghouse for area ministries. What I mean by this is, if the Baptist pastor somehow attended a meeting where he was or she was baptized in the Holy Spirit, and spoke in tongues, they might be asked to give up their Baptist congregation or Nazarene congregation because it was believed to be not for today. Well, if that person who had to leave their home denomination because of Holy Spirit stuff had to leave their church, they might want to start their own full gospel church, and that often is the case. In Atlanta, Georgia, the Mount Paran Church of God served this purpose for a long time.